legal analyst. He also had a life before he was our legal analyst. You were the I always get this wrong.
White House staff assistant to President Ford.
Staff assistant for President Ford, and now you're still the lawyer for the family, right? You're still the counsel?
Do some legal work for the family and trustee for his foundation.
And over the weekend, the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier was commissioned.
Yes.
Yes. So explain that. I thought they had already dedicated it.
She was christened McGraw in 2013, where the bottle of sparkling water is broken on the bow. And then Saturday, she was commissioned into the fleet. So she is now the USS Gerald R. Ford, and she is part of the fleet. She is the largest and most powerful ship ever built. It is massive. She has 3 times the power of our current aircraft carriers. She can launch, when she's out on deployment, can launch aircraft every 60 seconds. And it is just the weapon systems and the other, the new technologies, they're really breathtaking.
I've seen an aircraft carrier, the old kind, the small ones, right? So when you say this one's massive, I can only imagine how big it is, considering I've seen the smaller ones, and the smaller ones are insanely large.
Right. The current class, the Nimitz class, they are, as you say, insanely large. And this one is a little larger. Probably the most noticeable change for our listeners, McGraw, is we all remember the movie Top Gun.
Yeah.
When Maverick and Goose were shot off by the catapults in the F-18s. Well, you remember the steam that would come up. Well, that's because the catapults, the pistons that powered those catapults, was steam. Well, on the USS Gerald R. Ford and the new Ford class of carriers, there's no steam. They are powered by magnets.
Magnets?
Magnets. It's called the EMALS system. 2 years ago, the president's daughter Susan and I were on board, and we were testing with the Navy and the shipbuilders the EMALS system.
Right.
And they would shoot sleds that matched the weight of aircraft. They would shoot these sleds into the James River. And it's almost eerie because on a current carrier, when they shoot those jets, you can hear the steam. You can hear the piston.
Yeah.
On the Ford class, there's no sound.
So they were testing it by taking something that's equal weight of an aircraft and shooting that into the water.
Yes, it's a sled on wheels, and they would line it up just like an F-18.
Right.
And the shooter down in the bubble would hit the button, and they would shoot it out into the James River.
Magnets.
Magnets.
Do they land this the same way with the rope and the tail hook?
Yeah, they have the same tail hook. They have 3 wires, as they're called, and that's a new system, AAG, Advanced Arresting Gear System.
Yeah. Now, when you said the Nimitz class versus the Ford class, is this the first of many Ford class?
Yes, CVN-77, the George H.W. Bush, was the last Nimitz class carrier.
Okay.
So CVN-78 begins the new class, and since it was named after President Ford, it is the Ford class, and the lead carrier in that class is the USS Gerald R. Ford. 79 has already been named and is being built, the USS John F. Kennedy, and 80 has been named. It is just beginning to be built, and that's the USS Enterprise.
And how long does it take to build an aircraft carrier?
It takes about 13 years from the first cut of steel, McGraw. My involvement began in November of 2006. I was summoned to the Pentagon by then Secretary of the Navy Winter to talk about the naming ceremony. That night, I called President and Mrs. Ford and their daughter Susan to explain the Navy meeting I'd had and the plans for the naming ceremony. The president's health was failing at that point, McGraw, but he was ebullient on that call, and he had lots of questions about the ship and how long the construction was going to take. We concluded the call. He said, "Come visit Greg." I said, "I'll see you soon, Mr. President." And that's the last time I talked to him. He died the next month. But he died, McGraw, and Vice President Cheney and Secretary Rumsfeld and I, all 3 of us, had interactions with him those last weeks about the ship.
Right.
And we all take great comfort and pride knowing that the president knew that this ship was going to be named for him and how much pride he took.
Yeah. Wow, great story. So you were there, you were rubbing elbows with Rumsfeld and Cheney, President Trump. Any inside dirt you can give us?
Well, I wouldn't say inside dirt. It was a wonderful ceremony as she was commissioned. President Trump presided over the ceremony. I was honored to be asked by the Navy and by the crew to present what's called the long glass. The first watch was set on the ship, and she will then have a watch for her next 60-plus years of service. So I was asked to present the long glass to set the first watch. It's a ceremony, a commissioning ceremony, McGraw, that goes back, goodness sakes, to the late 1700s.
Right.
And so they keep that Navy tradition. But so we had that tradition, and then lots of us who worked for President Ford were able to come and pay tribute to him. As you say, Vice President Cheney and Secretary Rumsfeld were there. Brent Scowcroft, God bless him,
Right.
he came. And so a lot of our former White House and the President's cabinet gathered. But it was a wonderful, wonderful event. 18,000 people, hot as Hades, in that hangar bay. But
where was it?
It was in Norfolk, Virginia,
Okay.
at Naval Station Norfolk, Pier 11.
All right.
So it was a terrific ceremony, and probably the best line of the day, with no offense to President Trump, but probably the best line of the day was Acting Navy Secretary Stackley.
Okay.
And he said, Mr. President, one of your predecessors once famously said, talk softly and carry a big stick. And he turned, he says, Mr. President, we present you this morning with a very big stick.
There you go. Did you shake President Trump's hand?
Yes.
Just shook his hand?
Met with him before. Susan and I and her
Yeah.
granddaughters met with the president before the ceremony
Right.
and visited.
Was it a big meeting, or did you have a chance to talk with him at all, or pleasantries?
Just
or?
exchange pleasant. No, it was just
Yeah.
the five of us,
Yeah.
four of us, and just a private meeting behind the platform before we got started.
Greg Willard with us, telling us the stories of how he was there at the commissioning of the USS Gerald Ford, a front seat to history all these many years. I got about a minute or two.
Yes.
Can President Trump pardon himself?
The short answer is yes, he can. And I think what has been missing this week in all of the clatter is a very important fact, McGraw, and that is, and it was the cornerstone of President Ford's pardon of Nixon, is for a pardon to be effective, it must be accepted. And in 1915, in the Burdick case, the United States Supreme Court said that acceptance of a presidential pardon, which is required for it to be effective,
Right.
acceptance of a pardon is an admission of guilt.
Right. So he can pardon himself. If he accepts his own pardon, he's admitting that he did something wrong.
Yes, and that was the cornerstone. When President Ford pardoned Nixon, he felt that it was important that President Nixon own up to the wrongdoing that he had
So Nixon
committed.
admitted he did something wrong and accepted the
By
pardon.
accepting the pardon,
Right.
he admitted that he admitted guilt.
Did you tell him this when you met him?
I did not.
Okay, you
I
didn't
think
go there. Okay.
Discretion is the better part of valor, my dear friend, and
All right.
we
So-
did not bring up the pardon.
Okay, so President Trump, according to law professor Greg Willard, KTRS legal analyst, he can pardon himself. Can he reject his own pardon?
No. I mean, at that point, I think it gets a little metaphysical. So
I was half joking, but in this day and age, I don't think anything is joking anymore.
I think as a practical matter, if a sitting president wants to pardon himself,
Yes.
he can. And
But again, you can pardon yourself, but that still doesn't take impeachment off the table, because you can still be impeached for not doing anything illegal.
you make the very critical link, McGraw, because acceptance of a pardon. Just take the steps.
Yeah.
He issues a pardon to himself. He accepts it. That is an admission of guilt, which my guess is the United States House of Representatives would say, our fellow Americans, he has admitted guilt.
Right.
Therefore, we can move quickly to impeachment.
He admitted guilt enough to take a pardon.
By
Therefore, what does that mean for
You
impeachment?
bet, by accepting the pardon. So I think stay tuned, but
Stay tuned. All right.
It's fasten your seatbelt. It's going to get interesting.
Greg Willard, St. Louis University law professor, KTRS legal analyst, and a good friend of the show. Thanks.